I live with my aunt, her husband, and their 2 children, a teenager and a toddler. To me, they're more than just family. They're an extension of my own siblings. I've been there to help raise both kids, and the bond we share is strong. The teenager feels like a younger sister, and the toddler is the baby we all adore. On this particular night, everything seemed ordinary. The teenager was at a sleepover, the husband was working late, and my aunt was out decorating a float for the town's Christmas parade. It was just me and the toddler at home, like so many evenings before. I'm used to babysitting, and although toddlers can be unpredictable, he's usually a sweet and cheerful kid. That evening, he was his usual self, giggling, playing with toy trains, and humming along to cheerful Christmas cartoons on YouTube. I was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner, enjoying the cozy holiday atmosphere. The smell of gingerbread cookies lingered in the air. The soft glow of Christmas lights illuminated the rooms, and the sound of the toddler's toys clattering filled the house. But the warmth of the season was about to take a chilling turn. It was just after 8 p.m. when the peaceful evening shattered. A piercing scream tore through the house, a scream so terrified it made my heart stop. I dropped the dish I was washing, letting it clatter into the sink, and sprinted toward the living room. Before I even reached the doorway, the toddler came running into the kitchen, his tiny feet pounding against the hardwood floor. His face was a mask of sheer terror, tears streaming down his cheeks as he wailed. He clung to my leg, as though his life depended on it. "What's wrong?" I asked, scooping him up. His little body trembled as he buried his face in my hoodie, sobbing uncontrollably. Between gasping breaths, he lifted his head just enough to point toward the front door. "Door!" he cried. I froze, my eyes darting to the living room. The toys were scattered where he had been playing. The Christmas tree lights twinkled serenely, and the YouTube cartoons still played in the background. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it that way. "Did someone knock?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The toddler shook his head violently and clutched me tighter. "Man," he whispered. "Man at the door." I locked the door immediately, checking it twice before turning my attention back to him. I tried to comfort him, telling him it was probably just his imagination, maybe a shadow or a trick of the light. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. You see, this house has a history, a dark one. My aunt and her husband have always been open about the strange occurrences in their home. Before they bought it decades ago, it belonged to 2 brothers with a violent and tragic history. The story goes that the brothers had such intense hatred for each other that one Christmas Eve, an argument spiraled out of control. Fueled by rage and perhaps something darker, they attacked each other. By the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, both were dead. Since then, strange things have reportedly happened in the house. Lights flicker, objects move on their own, and cold drafts sweep through warm rooms. My aunt firmly believes that her late grandfather's spirit protects the family, keeping darker entities at bay. I'd always brushed it off as superstition or exaggeration. But now, standing in the kitchen with a trembling toddler in my arms, staring at a door I knew I had locked, I wasn't so sure anymore. I carried the toddler upstairs, hoping to settle him down. He clung to me tightly, refusing to let go. So, I settled him on my lap in the rocking chair and began humming softly to calm him. Eventually, His sobs turned into hiccups, and his eyelids began to droop. Just when I thought he was asleep, he whispered, "Man at the door." No face. The room seemed to close in around me. "What did you say?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "No face," he repeated, eyes half-lidded. He looked at me. My blood turned to ice. The faint hum of the baby monitor on the dresser seemed unnaturally loud. Then, as if on cue, I heard it. A soft knock. But it wasn't coming from the front door this time. It was coming from upstairs. The sound was faint at first. Just a subtle tap, tap, tap that could easily be mistaken for the wind. But as I strained to listen, it grew louder and more deliberate. It was coming from the attic. The attic door was down the hall, a wooden hatch in the ceiling, with a pull-down ladder. It was rarely used, mostly for storing old decorations and forgotten items. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to investigate. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I carried the toddler back downstairs and locked us in the den. I turned on every light, the TV, and even some Christmas music to drown out the oppressive silence. But no matter how much noise I created, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The knocking continued upstairs, rhythmic and insistent, as if something or someone was trying to send a message. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. When my aunt finally returned home, I told her everything. She listened intently, her face pale. "You didn't open it, did you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, of course not." "Good," she said, visibly relieved. "We try not to disturb whatever's up there. It's best to leave it alone." "Wait, what's up there?" She hesitated. "We don't know. But every Christmas, strange things happen. The knocking, the shadows. It's why we leave an extra plate of food on the table during Christmas dinner. It's an old tradition, a way to appease restless spirits." I stared at her in disbelief. "And you didn't think to warn me?" "I didn't think you'd believe me." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside, made my skin crawl. The toddler slept peacefully beside me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he saw wasn't finished with us. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences continued. Ornaments fell from the tree without warning. Faint footsteps echoed on the stairs, and shadows moved just beyond the edge of my vision. And every night, the attic knocks returned. Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy and togetherness. But in this house, it's something else entirely. This Christmas, we're not celebrating alone. We never are. It was Christmas Eve, and I never imagined that the peaceful evening would turn into a night I would never forget. The snow had fallen softly, blanketing everything in white, and I had just finished wrapping the last of the presents. The world outside my apartment was quiet, serene, as though it were frozen in time. Little did I know something was about to shatter that stillness. It started like any other quiet Christmas Eve. I lived alone in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town, a place I'd grown used to over the years. The neighbors were all friendly enough, though I didn't know many of them well. It wasn't a particularly busy street, and most people seemed to stay inside during the colder months, especially around the holidays. That evening, I had wrapped the gifts, sipped my cocoa, and sat down by the window to enjoy the peaceful snowfall outside. My phone buzzed once, then again, with messages from family members wishing me a Merry Christmas. I replied, feeling a bit lonely. but it was the kind of loneliness that felt comfortable, almost like a blanket. It was just after midnight when I first heard the knock. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe someone's car door slamming or the sound of someone's boot crunching in the snow outside. But then there it was again. I hesitated, thinking it might be one of the neighbors, a late visitor, maybe someone in need of something. But the more I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. Who knocks at this hour on Christmas Eve? I slowly made my way to the door, peeking through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. No sign of anyone. I opened the door a crack, but the cold air hit me like a shock. I stepped outside, looking down the empty hallway of the apartment building. Still no one. I was about to turn back when I noticed something on the ground. A small, neatly wrapped box. It wasn't big, just a little square package wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a red ribbon. There was no tag, no name, just the package. I crouched down to pick it up, feeling a sudden, inexplicable shiver run up my spine. I glanced around, still unsure of who could have left it there. But with no one in sight, I figured it was harmless. A Christmas gift from a well-meaning neighbor, maybe. I took it inside and set it on the table. The wrapping was tight, and the paper was smooth. Something about it felt off, though. It was too neat, too perfect. I stared at it for a few moments before I untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper. Inside was a small, old-fashioned key. No note, no explanation, just a key. I held it up, examining it. It wasn't particularly old, but it looked worn, used. I couldn't make sense of it. My first instinct was to throw it away, but I couldn't bring myself to. I set it down on the counter, still pondering what it could mean. I considered asking a neighbor if they knew anything about it, but I felt a strange hesitation. It felt wrong to involve anyone else. Hours passed, and the unease slowly crept in. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. The house was still, the Christmas lights on my tree flickering softly in the background. I was in the kitchen, sipping more cocoa, when I heard it again. This time, it was louder, closer. I froze, my hand still gripping the mug. The sound seemed to echo through the apartment, rattling in my bones. The air felt heavier now, charged with a strange energy. I glanced over at the door, wondering if I should check again. But something in me said I shouldn't. I didn't want to face whatever was out there. Then came the soft scrape of something across the floor. It was almost too quiet, but it was unmistakable. A dragging sound, like something heavy being moved. I slowly set the mug down, my pulse pounding in my ears, and moved toward the door again. This time I didn't peek through the peephole. I opened it fully, stepping outside into the cold, dark hallway. The door across from mine was wide open, its interior dark and empty. My heart skipped a beat as I looked down at the floor. Another small gift lay there, wrapped in the same brown paper. It seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. My stomach twisted as I bent down to pick it up, not wanting to know what was inside, but feeling a compulsion I couldn't explain. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside was another key. This one was different, though. Larger, more intricate, with ornate designs carved into its surface. There was no note, no tag, just the key. I looked back up at the empty hallway, my skin crawling. Whoever had left this, they were still close. I could feel it. I had to find out what it meant. I made the decision then to visit the apartment manager's office. It was a risky move at 3 a.m., but I had to know if anything strange had been happening in the building. I stepped into the cold hallway again, my footsteps echoing as I moved toward the stairs. When I reached the lobby, the lights were off, but the office door was ajar. I pushed it open, and to my shock, the office was empty, except for a small package sitting on the desk. My heart raced as I walked closer. This time, the package was different. It was larger, wrapped in the same brown paper, but this one had a note attached to it. It was addressed to me. I carefully opened the note. The handwriting was neat but hurried, scrawled on an old scrap of paper. "You've been chosen." Before I could process the meaning of the words, the lights in the office flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. A low hum filled the room like an electric buzz. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. The screen remained black. Bang! The sound echoed through the room, sharp and jarring. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. Something moved in the shadows. A figure. I heard breathing. Soft at first, but growing louder. Closer. From behind me. I don't know how I made it back to my apartment. I don't remember much after that moment. The rest of the night is a blur of disjointed images and muffled sounds. But when I got home, the door was wide open. I don't know who did this. I don't know why. And I don't know what they want. All I know is that something is watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. But I'm not sure what move to make. I haven't heard the knocking since that night, but I still feel it, echoing in the back of my mind. And every time I close my eyes, I see the keys, the note. "You've been chosen." To this day, I still don't know if I'm being followed, but I do know one thing, that Christmas Eve wasn't a coincidence. And now, as I sit here, I hear it again. Who is it? Who's there? Is it too late to leave? Or is it already too late? It was Christmas Eve, the most wonderful time of the year. My family was busy with preparations for the holiday dinner. My mom cooking in the kitchen, my dad wrapping presents, and my younger brother eagerly awaiting Santa's arrival. The house was warm, cozy, decorated with twinkling lights, and the smell of cinnamon and freshly baked cookies filled the air. The kind of Christmas anyone would dream of. But something was wrong. It started when I noticed the strange reflection in the window. I was standing in the living room, admiring the Christmas tree, when I noticed something odd in the reflection of the window. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But when I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't just a trick of the light. There was someone standing outside. They were barely visible, just a dark silhouette, tall and unmoving. Their face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel their eyes on me. A cold, sharp shiver ran through me, and my breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be anyone I knew. I was sure of it. The lights were off outside, and no one was supposed to be out there. I hesitated, staring at the figure through the glass. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching me. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, cutting through the stillness like a knife. My heart leapt in my chest. I looked back at the window, but the figure was gone. I walked cautiously to the door, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe it was just a neighbor. Maybe it was someone selling Christmas trees or carolers. But when I opened the door, no one was there. The cold air swept into the house, carrying with it the scent of pine and frost. I stood there for a moment, perplexed, before I shut the door. My pulse quickened, and the strange feeling of being watched lingered. I glanced at the clock. 10:30 p.m. Just a few hours left until Christmas Day. I went back to the living room, trying to shake off the unease. The lights flickered for a moment. Probably just a glitch, I thought. I turned my attention back to the Christmas tree. Then I heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the window. I froze. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, like something dragging against the glass. Slowly, I approached the window again, my heart pounding in my chest. When I peered outside, the figure was there again, standing perfectly still. Only this time, it was much closer, right up against the window. My hands trembled as I backed away from the glass, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The figure wasn't just standing anymore. It was staring directly at me. Its face was still obscured, but now I could see something glinting in its eyes. Not just a reflection of light, but something inhuman, something dark. I spun around, rushing to tell my parents. But when I reached the kitchen, the room was empty. My mom's cooking was still on the stove, but there was no sign of anyone. I called out for them, my voice echoing through the empty house. But there was no reply. Panicked, I ran to my brother's room. His bed was empty, his window was open, the curtains blowing slightly in the breeze. The Christmas lights from the tree outside flickered, casting odd shadows across the room. I slammed the window shut, my mind racing. Where was everyone? Where had they gone? And then I heard it. A whisper, a voice, soft and cold, like the rustle of dead leaves. Let me in. I turned sharply, heart hammering in my chest. The voice had come from the hallway outside my brother's room. I crept toward it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. But when I reached the hallway, there was no one there, except for the footprints, small, wet prints on the floor, bare feet covered in snow, leading toward the front door, the door that had been locked just moments ago. I felt the weight of a terrible presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The figure was standing in the hallway, just outside my brother's room. But it wasn't the same figure from before. This one was closer. So close I could smell the coldness of its skin, like ice and death. Its face was no longer hidden by shadows. It was pale, too pale, with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to stretch on forever. Its mouth opened, a wide, gaping hole filled with jagged, broken teeth. It didn't speak, but I could hear it. It was telling me to come closer. My feet wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from its gaze. It took a step toward me, its movements unnaturally slow. Then another, and another. I backed away, my breath shallow. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body refused to listen. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more. The house felt colder, the air thick with a biting frost. Then, without warning, the figure lunged toward me. Its cold fingers brushed against my skin, sending a shock of freezing pain through my body. "Let me in," it whispered again, louder this time, its voice like nails scraping across glass. In a panic, I slammed the door to my brother's room shut, locking it behind me. My body shook uncontrollably, tears welling up in my eyes, but the door handle rattled. I turned and ran, charging down the stairs into the kitchen. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't care. I couldn't think. I needed to find my parents, to find my brother. I reached for the door, but then the phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a message. It was from my mom. "We're not coming back." The message was followed by a single image, a picture of me, standing in front of the Christmas tree, just like I had been moments ago. But there was no reflection in the glass. There was no tree behind me, just the dark, empty space of the hallway, and something else, the same figure standing right behind me, and this time, it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking at me.